My name is Donald Thacker, and I am 39 years old. I served and still serve in the 35th U.S. Army Infantry Division as a second lieutenant. During patrol and combat, I am a demolition engineer, which, in general terms, is a soldier that places tripwire mines, S-mines, C4s, M18 claymores, and other crap. Afterwards, I prime them on, so they can explode on contact like the mines and claymores, or they can be prepared to detonate by remote activation like the C4s do. At night, I'm a tracker, which in general terms is a serviceman or woman who wears night vision goggles to make sure the enemy doesn't relocate or attempt an attack. If the enemy does, we alert our commanding officer, our CO, about it. This took place 7 years ago during the Afghanistan War that I have been in since 2002. I have had many stories to share about the war, but this one has to be the scariest. It was 2011 during Operation Hammerdown, so I was a sergeant major at the time. We had just finished tearing up a Taliban campsite and moved our site close to the one we just took. Our platoon captain ordered me to rig a few C4s and medium-sized S-mines around our campsite for safety purposes and in case the Taliban attempted to retake the campsite. Dusk fell fast, and sure enough, I was behind a pile of sandbags, tracking enemy movement with my fellow service mate, Stevie Kurtz. However, there was no enemy in my line of sight, and Stevie informed me that he couldn't see any Taliban either. With that, we reported to the captain, in which he explained how the Taliban's falling back, but ordered us to take a final scout around to make sure no stragglers were still out there. We went back out, and sure enough, nobody was in sight, until I spotted a figure moving behind a tree with the tree line to the east. I nudged Stevie and asked him if he saw the figure. He told me he didn't and pointed towards the direction I saw it, to which he looked. He told me that he spotted the figure leaving a tree. I peered through my goggles, and surely enough, the figure had moved. That's when Stevie raised his M4 Commando assault rifle in its direction, while I continued to stare at it through my green lens. We did have orders to shoot on sight if anything got within 100 feet of our sight. The figure left the tree line as it started to get closer. I zoomed in to get a better view, but the image was too blurry, so I zoomed out just enough that I could start to make out its features. It was tall, like non-humanly tall. Recollecting my thoughts now as I write this, I'd say it was about 7 feet, and it didn't have any hair. As soon as we analyzed it, Stevie looked as shocked as I did. What is that?" he asked. "I can't tell. Maybe it's a freakishly tall and bald tango," I replied. "Yeah, you call that, thing a tango?" Steve inquired with a hint of sarcasm. Upon second glance, I began to realize more and more that unknown figure was not human. "I don't like this," Stevie said with a shiver in his voice. I was feeling the same and wondered if I should report it to the captain. He told us not to report anything unless it's 150 feet away. It got even closer, bypassing 2 road signs, in which it was as tall as both of them. Now, due to it being closer, I was able to make out more of it. It appeared to have scales, making it a reptilian-like humanoid. It had both long arms, fingers, and legs. When I got about 175 feet away, I wanted to scream because I saw that the long fingers weren't fingers. They were claws. Claws that stretched about 5 inches from its actual fingers, and its eyes were a scarlet that pierced my brain. This was probably no reptilian creature known to man, and it looked like something out of a horror movie. It eventually let out a loud hiss, which caught us and the other 2 trackers on the other side of the campsite off guard. They told us to quiet down, and we told them that we weren't making any noises. They ordered us to explain ourselves, and we explained to them about the creature we just watched. The 2 just told us that we were tired and are imagining things. We told him to have a look through our glasses, and just as he did, an explosion occurred about 75 feet away from us. One of my medium S-mines just went off, and it was slightly toward the direction where I saw the creature. The entire company raced out of their tents and bags to see what was up, and the captain yelled at me, asking me what happened. The 4 of us told him that one of the mines had gone off, and he had Jumbo, our radio man, get on the headset with HQ. The captain wanted me to tell him if we saw anything, and Stevie and I recited the whole thing. The captain responded just the same as the other 2. He told us to get some shut-eye and that it was probably a slight discharge to the mine which caused the explosion. The reserves filled in our 2 spots that night, and I couldn't get a second of sleep that night. The next morning, we didn't spot the creature, assuming he blew up in the explosion or fled the area. A squad, including myself, Stevie, the captain, the 2 other trackers, and a few other soldiers investigated the scene. We saw that there were some dry yellowish-green liquid stains and pieces of scaly skin. Stevie and I thought this was proof of what we saw, but the team dismissed the skin as that from a native snake and the liquid as dirty pee. One thing that stood out to me, though, was the organ and 3 bones we found, but they dismissed thoughts as the Taliban's. To this day, I still have nightmares and conspiracies as to what that creature was. An unknown species finally making its way out of hiding. An enemy soldier in dress-up? Probably not. A mutant made by the Taliban or our own government who used this creature to scare our or their military presence. Maybe a test of some sort of assault species created by the depths of Area 51 to kill our enemies. These all sound weird, but due to all the secrets in our own system of government and in life, who knows what that creature Stevie and I saw 7 years ago could be. I had always been a gentle-natured person as a child, more of the passive type, in order to avoid confrontation. I never wanted to fight, but trouble always seemed to find me regardless. So when a friend of mine joined the Marines, I was surprised to find myself contemplating the same decision. This was all going down during the recession in 2009, a time where no jobs were available to high school graduates. Reluctantly, I ended up on those infamous yellow footprints. My time in the Marines would give me thick skin and a bit of an edge. Fast forward a year later, my unit and I were out in the middle of the desert training for what would be my first deployment to Afghanistan. I was in an infantry unit and assigned to one of the companies. My job was in communications, so anything involving radios to satellites was in my domain of responsibilities. A month into the training op, I quickly ran into some serious problems dealing with comms. When you park your campsite next to a huge rocky hill, you're going to run into some issues getting magnetic waves to penetrate solid rock. Grunts aren't the dumbest of people, but on occasion you will come across a special kind of individual who seems to react to electromagnetic waves the same way someone would to magic. This complicates my job tremendously when they refuse my instructions for properly implementing various radio systems. I worked under several people, and as the boot, I wasn't taken as seriously as should have been, being that I was the expert on the matter. Arsenal, a fellow Marine, was assigned to the company along with me. The guy was your real-life Smeagol from Lord of the Rings. Our paradynamic was out of whack due to me being a new Marine. Arsenal would often disregard my warnings and cause some major comm failures. He would just pass these off as my mistakes. One day, Arsenal made one too many mistakes, and one day during a practice assault on a compound. The day was over and comms were functioning normally again. To be honest, some days you just had to pray the radios would work. We worked directly under the company Gunny, who at first seemed like the most chill and kind-loving natured person. I would soon find out the truth. He had called Arsenal and I into the wooden control room. All of a sudden, we were both pinned up against the wall, tasting that good pine wood, when he said, "I'm gonna mess you both up." His eyes were bulging out of their sockets like some kind of lunatic. The smell of cigarettes also filled my nostrils, making me sick. Spit spewing into the side of my face. His veins began to swell all over and blood filled his whole face. Then he started taking off his belt, shouting at me that he was going to have his way with me. I honestly believed I was about to be assaulted. We were both scared. He started telling us he was sick of comms not working and getting hounded by the first sergeant on the issue. When I thought things couldn't get worse, they did. He pulls out his pistol, cocks it back, loading a round into the chamber. He held it to Arsenal's temple, yelling, "Which one of you idiots is to blame?" Of course, he would say me. These 2 minutes seemed like an eternity of me begging for another chance to make things right. I have never been more afraid, thinking I was going to die over stuff that was literally out of my control. Out of nowhere, he was being called by the first sergeant and begins to put his belt back on and holster his gun. I have never been more relieved in my life. I could have peed myself and not realized that I had. In prison, the saying, snitches get stitches, tend to ring true in the Corps. All senior Marines have each other's back, hence why nothing was ever done about him. I saw him from time to time. Gunny seemed like he was a completely different person, but I always knew better. He was bonkers. I knew about the demon that hid behind that disarming, charismatic smile. Later on into my career, he was prohibited from holding a weapon, which is crazy since his whole career hinged on the use of them. I'm a 23-year-old college student. My girlfriend of 6 years is 22, also a student. At the time the story takes place, we were both still in our late teens and attending a local community college. At the time, let's call her Quinn, was working at the Spencer's in our local mall. I was and am still working at another wonderful retail establishment. Now, as an attractive teenage girl and working at a softcore shop, you can imagine the breed of creep she had to tolerate while working there. Trust me, we have some stories ranging from creepy dads, even to a recently released mental patient. All stories for another time, I suppose. But the one we will be talking about today, well, he may be the worst of the bunch. Quinn was closing one night and a pair of guys came in. One of the guys comes up to her. He was wearing a college sweater but looked way too old to be an undergrad. He introduces himself as Kyle and says that he just recently transferred from another school and was about to graduate with his BA at a public college nearby. "So, what are you doing after this? We're going to a party if you'd like to come by," he asks. Now Quinn, when you first meet her, is often shy and reserved. That being said, she was used to getting hit on by her customers while she worked in Spencer's. Even if she wasn't in a relationship with yours truly, she would have done the same thing that she had done that night, which was turn him down nicely and go home to snuggle with her cat. Sorry, I already have plans," she answered. And that was that, and disappointed Kyle left. Fast forward a few months, same scenario. Quinn is closing, and Kyle and his buddy come in. Only this time he introduces himself as Ben. Ben says he had recently transferred to the nearby university. Only this time his school of origin had changed. While these came across as massively red flags, Quinn wrote it off. Maybe she didn't remember his exact name or his exact college. Everybody who has worked retail knows that the same customer could come to your register twice, maybe even 3 times in a day, and you won't even recognize them. But another day when Quinn was walking around the mall on her break, Ben comes up to her again, new name and new school. This song and dance went on for several months. Each time he acted like he didn't recognize her, to the point where it was dang near impossible to write it off. One day near the end of the spring semester, I was walking out of class. I pulled out my phone to check on any texts that I may have gotten while I was spacing out during my lecture. My phone had blown up in my absence. I had received a bunch of messages, some from a number I didn't recognize, some from Quinn. Quinn had been at the Wawa right near campus. When she went to return to her car, she recognized Kyle Ben waiting for her. At the time, Quinn was well known for her blue Mustang. Many people knew that car was hers, but there was no reason for Kyle or Ben to know what car she drove. "Dude, is this your car?" he asked. Yeah?" Quinn trailed off. "Maybe you could come take me out in it sometime," said Kyle Ben. He asked her for her number. "I don't really give out my number," she answered, trying to get away from this guy. He persisted. She made a clutch move and gave him my number. I opened his messages. They read, "Haha, hey. It's me from the gas station. You look so creeped out, sorry if I scared you. I'm 23 by the way." Like I said, the guy obviously was much older than what he put on, and the way he dropped his age unsolicited was a major red flag to me. I wanted to message this creep and tell him to leave Quinn alone, but she begged me not to. She didn't want to cause any trouble or make him angry. He, after all, knew what she drove, where she worked, and reluctantly I respected her wishes. Months had passed. Quinn leaves Spencer's when they started to conflict with her education, and we hear little to nothing of Kyle or Ben. One day, a year or so later, she tags me in a post. It was one of those share to warn your friends of this creepy idiot post. This one was about Kyle Ben. His real name is Craig, and he is notorious around our area for lurking around malls and college campuses, harassing and stalking girls. Many times he's gotten aggressive, calling girls all sorts of names, and he would text girls non-stop after a date has gone awry. Dozens of girls came forward, sharing their stories. A private support group page even started for Victims of Creepy Craig. I read through these stories, each closely resembling Quinn's, others far worse. Eventually, Craig caught wind of this, threatened to hurt himself, and all of the posts in the page eventually gotten taken down. More time passes. Creepy Craig is a distant memory. I'm at work one night when Quinn sends me a message. It was a mugshot of Creepy Craig. He had been arrested for doing terrible things to a 13-year-old girl. I'd like to say that I was surprised, but I really wasn't. I'm just thankful this guy is a known offender now, and hopefully he won't get the chance to attack any more girls. For general context, I am an 18-year-old female living along the mid-Atlantic coast of the United States. This incident occurred during this past summer when I was working at my job at a local pharmacy. I had worked this job for a little over 2 years at that point, needing to make ends meet in order to pay for gas and other necessities throughout my high school years. My coworkers always treated me like a little sister since I was the youngest employee on the team, and it's something that I've always appreciated during my time working there. When I first started working for the store, I was a typical awkward high school girl with very little to no experience working in customer service, let alone talking to complete strangers day in and day out. However, over the years I had grown much more outgoing and demonstrated a rather bubbly attitude towards people, comfortable with the idea of helping complete strangers with a rather positive attitude. I lived by the motto, treat others the way you wanted to be treated, while on my shifts, and usually I had no backlash with that kind of work ethic. I suppose you could say I let my guard down a bit with this demeanor, and after the experience I had while working at the store, I had become more reserved and less outward with my introductions to people. The town where I live is notorious for its bad reputation with drugs. The heroin epidemic in the area has spiked significantly over the past 20 years due to various amounts of causes. It's not unheard of for stores around where I work to have stories of people ODing in their parking lots or bathrooms, and even my store had some strange characters come in. People obviously strung out on drugs with slurred speech patterns and erratic behavior were somewhat of a common occurrence. My coworkers and I learned to get used to them coming in, and since I was the number one counter girl to ring them up for whatever the cheap cigarettes they needed to buy or whatever the case, I became accustomed to their behavior. They usually came in during the late evening hours when I worked, as I was the night shift, and usually there were other coworkers or managers on the floor, so I never felt completely isolated with these druggies. I should also point out that I'm only about 5'2" with blonde hair and, without sounding too obnoxious, a rather good-looking girl. I would get some comments here and there about my appearance, and I would politely thank them, as it wasn't usually anything too straightforward or gross in the least bit. However, there were a few occasions where I would get some crude comment about my body or all the things the particular person would like to do to me. I usually just laughed it off awkwardly, as I was never too sure what to do or say in those situations without the risk of losing my well-loved job. There were also a few times when I would notice a man following me in the store. It was never obvious enough to scare me. Usually when I would be stocking shelves, I'd notice a guy standing a bit too close in the aisle, reading labels of vitamins I know shouldn't be that interesting. None of that prepared me for what was to come. This particular event occurred one late afternoon during the summer. It was around 4 or 5 in the afternoon, and we had just received our shipment of food to unload for the following week. I grabbed one of my carts and started gathering some of the candy from one of the many totes of food we received and began doing my job. I noticed a man walk down into my aisle and started to aimlessly look at all the candy. He was black, about 5'10", and semi-stocky in build, with a red t-shirt on and some gym shorts. I'd say his age range was somewhere in his mid to late 20s. I asked him kindly with my overly polite customer voice, "Do you need any help with anything, sir?" He looked over at me and gave me a smile, but something about it I knew was off. I can't pinpoint it to this day, but it was something that made me put myself a bit on guard just by the look he gave me. No, not right now," the man replied, before seemingly looking back at the candy and staring at it like it was going to move or something. I went back to work, stocking up the candy on the higher shelves and minding my own business. This went on for about 10 minutes or so, and the man was still in the aisle with me. At that point, I was starting to get a bit creeped out. What guy stands in the candy aisle and just stares at the candy for that long? I decided to put things to the test. I walked away from my candy for a bit and went to the back room to organize some shelves before heading out to the main floor again, but this time in another aisle with different items to unload. As predicted, he found me in the aisle once more and stood in the aisle, randomly picking up items and setting them back, as if though he was reading them. Finally, after about 5 or so minutes of awkward silence, he chimed up. "Hey, do you actually mind coming over for a second? I have a question about one of these sales." I looked over at him. His face relaxed from that creepy grin, but that feeling of worry still creeped throughout my body. Despite this, I replied back, Yeah, sure, what's your question?" I walked over towards him, myself facing the shelf on the aisle, analyzing the tag to see what his problem might be. The man stood about a foot from me, sideways so he was facing me. "Yeah, I was, wondering, when does this sale end?" he asked, voice a little shaky. I kept my gaze away from him, not wanting to look him in the eye. The question was rather stupid to say the least, as it stated on the sales tag on the bottom right corner when the sale ended. "It ends on the 21st, I replied, a little curtly, trying not to sound impatient, when I noticed out of the corner of my eye a slight repetitive movement coming from the man. I couldn't be sure what it was, but I quickly scurried away as the man just gave me total creeper vibes. That was the moment I started getting scared. I went into the back room a second time and hid in the bathroom for about 10 minutes or so. Did I see what I thought I saw? No way. It couldn't have been anything. I wasn't even looking at him. It was simply a quick glance that could no way confirm what horrific thing I thought I noticed. Calming myself down a bit, I splashed some cold water on my face and went back to the candy aisle I had previously been working in. I went back to stocking shelves with the man nowhere in sight. I let out a sigh of relief and nearly pushed him out of my mind when I turned around in the aisle, some bags of Smarties on the cart behind me, and he was standing there to the right of the cart. My heart dropped, but I proceeded to keep my gaze lowered while I organized some more bags of candy when I turned my gaze towards him, noticing the repetitive movement again and almost let out a scream. His body was positioned the same as before when he asked me about the sales tag earlier, his one shoulder pressed against the shelf of the aisle and his body facing me. He had his privates out of his gym shorts and fully stroking himself off in the middle of the store, not 1 foot away from me. I stood there in shock for a brief second before darting into the next aisle over where, conveniently, my manager was. I grabbed her and pulled her into the back room, nearly crying and stumbling on the words I was saying. Now, something you need to know about this manager is that she is a complete spitfire. She's in her late 50s and is smaller than me, but has the attitude and hot-headed nature of a bull. So when I told her that this strange man decided it would be a good idea to show his affections towards me by jerking off in front of me, her face went bright red and took off out of the back room. Now, instead of going and chasing after him like she wanted, she instead went out into the parking lot to identify his tag number on his license if he got into a vehicle. Sadly, by the time she had gotten out of the store, the man had taken off on foot across the highway that ran by our store. I sat, shaking and in shock, in the office over that. The cops were called and we filed a report on the man and pulled the surveillance tapes. The day following, we get a call from the state police that a man was arrested doing the same exact thing to another female employee in a town about 20 minutes away and was arrested. I'm not entirely sure what happened after that, as I got mixed reports from the police that he fled to another state, and another report saying he was arrested once more for an indecency charge. To this day, I still haven't really gotten over that. If any lesson was to come for this, even working at customer service where you need to have a smile and chipper attitude, always keep a guard up, because you never know who could abuse that. my dad was really young, he and his family had a dog that they loved. My dad and his two siblings used to play with the dog by putting a sheet over themselves and walk around on their hands and feet. When the dog died, they still did this as an inside joke. One day when my dad was home alone, he was sitting in the hallway looking into the bedroom. All of a sudden he got a weird feeling and saw the sheet stand up like there was someone or something underneath it. At first, he thought it was one of his siblings messing around and then realized that they weren't. The figure in the sheet rushed across the room and into his closet. Confused, he got up and went to the closet to see what made the sheet move. The sheet was there, but no one was in the closet. To this day, he still believes it was the ghost of his beloved dog, trying to cheer him up. Hey friends, thanks for listening. Be sure to subscribe and click that notification bell to be alerted of all future narrations. If you got a story, be sure to submit them to my subreddit, r/LetsReadOfficial, and give and receive feedback from the community, and maybe even hear it featured here on the channel. And grab early access to all future narrations for just $1 a month on Patreon, and maybe even pick up some Let's Read merch on Spreadshirt, links in the bio. Thanks so much, friends, and I'll see you again soon.